Peter, thanks so much, and to each of you for coming out in this cold midwinter night. And a small, intimate group is great, and look forward to any of your thoughts. There'll be plenty of time for that, or interactions, as you will. My name is Ken Brack. I'm a narrative nonfiction author, and especially for you is what I'm excited to share with you tonight. And just first, a quick thank to the library for inviting me and for this opportunity, and to Harbor Media filming this for later use. So I will try to keep it additionally lively. And a quick thumbnail of where I'd like to go. I'll give you a little introduction on myself and, of course, the book. And to my right, want to explain what this thematically, what the Tapestry, how it relates to the book. Also will tell you, in some depth, why I wrote it and the process of doing it. And then also a little bit of my goals or intentions and primary audience. So especially for you is the uplifting stories of people who find a new purpose after catastrophic loss. It's about how we grow through traumatic ordeals, how we heal and how difficult that can be, the setbacks along the way. And while skill sets that help many of us cope, such as being resilient, are important, and we probably all know about that in our own experience, my book is really more about what's called post-traumatic growth by psychologists. It's the wrenching ways we go through it, but it's making meaning. How do we make meaning from the loss of a loved one or some other trauma? And the book is narrative-driven, and I'll explain this more. But it's my voice as a grieving dad. My wife Denise is here. My better half is here tonight. We lost our son Michael in a car crash in 2002. So as his dad, my voice is there. But the book is primarily 85% about the stories of some other families, everyday people who do some extraordinary things. And it's just, briefly, it's structured so there's three main sections that are pretty deep, and not everyone may want to read all of them, and which is fine. I'm hearing from readers, you can kind of make your way through it in chunks if you like. But around those three big sections of these family stories is literally bookended, with our stories and what's come out of it. And in short, one of the key response that my wife and I have been able to do was to answer an impulse in our gut. Some months after losing our son, we felt, how can we help another family going through a similar terrible ordeal? Because when this happened to us, there were no places to turn other than kind of clinical settings, which is okay, it has its proper use. But in other words, where is a place that people who are traveling, who have traveled or are still traveling a similar road, can be together to support one another, to help them cope? And we created, you may or may not know of us, based in Kingston, Hope Floats Healing and Wellness Center, which is a bereavement center. Primarily we offer free support groups for adults, and more so now for children and teens as well, with their caregivers. And that response, the story of creating that response, is a key part of the book. But again, most of the book is about other people. So there's a long introduction to the book. A little bit more about myself more directly. Denise and I live in Kingston. We've been on the South Shore for 24 years and raised 3 children here. I'm a former high school English teacher and previously a journalist. Last stop was at the Patriot Ledger for daily writing. And the skill sets of journalism, being a reporter, interviewer, researcher, and documentarian of sorts, really helped me write the book. Yet, that's not why I wrote it, and you can hear some of that. And I'll go more into that in a moment. I'd like to direct you to the Tapestry, which is based on an illustration my daughter Amanda did, which is part of the cover of the book. It's a little bit folded there because we got some hooks on the top, but hopefully you can take it in. And a couple things that this represents. We call it labyrinth shards. And you probably know in many faith and cultural traditions around the world, a labyrinth is a place where you set your intentions, maybe of prayer or some other meditative work you need to do, and you travel inward and go to the center, perhaps pause, maybe working something out, maybe you're deeper in prayer, and then work your way out. And that capacity to find solace, maybe redemption, perhaps letting go of your wrath, or being able to forgive someone, or right something that was wrong in your family or in the world, that possibility of finding solace on the way out is part of the book. And yet, you can see, if you can see down on the bottom especially, the pieces falling. And to me, that represents the fallout from catastrophic ordeals. Our lives are shattered, feel broken, just calamity, so suddenly, without cause. We don't know if the pieces will be ground up, what will happen, and perhaps worse, we wonder, will our loved ones be forgotten? Our identities as families or as a people are crushed. The pieces lay scattered. And yet, as you look at that, could there be something else happening there? Could there be some other movement? Could the pieces be rearranged in a new way, perhaps like broken stained glass going into a new mosaic? And there's no right or wrong, I think, however you interpret it, but that question or tension runs throughout the book. How do we heal? How do we reclaim our lives? What does it take? So I'm so proud of my daughter for helping me with that, but I feel like it blends together. Okay, more about. Oh, I didn't give you the full thumbnail. I'm sorry. I would like to do a short reading and then open it up for your thoughts and interchange. So we'll get to that in a little bit. More about why I wrote the book. Some of you may understandably ask, how did you do this? Why do that to yourself? How did you find the time and create the space to go into some dark places? And as Mike's dad, one of the ways I coped with his death was to become a seeker of sorts. I pursued answers to some really tough questions while meeting some of these everyday people and realizing that their stories could have an impact, and I felt it would be beneficial to share them with others. And I feel like I need to step back. One thing that in the why, with our son's story, I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. I hadn't mentioned November 15th, correct? I'm sorry, excuse me. It's hard, you can understand, it's hard to talk about. In the early morning hours of a Friday in mid-November 2002, we lost our son, Mike, who was 18. He was out with 3 buddies, underage drinking at a bar in Providence. And we had, once we got past our shock, we had so many things to deal with. So some of these questions that I wrestled with were the hows. How did the crash happen? How did they get into an underage bar? How does that work down there? Those questions, which go into some dark places, the answers do, are in the book, and I won't go further into that. But it does come out, I think, in an arc that's positive. More importantly, from those hows was the question, can we make some sense from this? What meaning can we find from Mike's death? At first, it was just enough to figure out, are we going to hang a stocking or not? How do we get through his birthday, the anniversaries, our other kids as they get older and maybe they have families, they're not going to have him as an uncle. But the question of how do we make sense of this grew, and that drove us far. And again, it relates to the pieces. Can the pieces be integrated in a healthy way? How do we reclaim our lives? And so kind of from there, I was just, yelling and screaming like many of us would, the whys, the existential questions, if you will, that have been rattling people since the Old Testament days and before. Why us, God? Where is the loving God? What is the point? The capricious nature of all this, whether it's a cousin who is diagnosed with breast cancer and stage 4 or something and has 6 months to live, or someone shot in a rampage like we see too often. What is the point? And yet, amidst the din of all those questions, I started to hear another cadence or another pulse. Through conversations with some of these other parents and individuals, listening to them, sometimes accompanying them, getting to know them, some of them, the key people, I guess, over several years, there was a camaraderie even, but the common ground that we shared, and really an accompaniment. And I felt that if I could help readers accompany some of these people and see them on their journey, if you will. I almost hate to use that word, but on their paths, that could be beneficial. So that's how I continued to put it together. And this leads to, and you're probably hearing, some of my main goals or intentions for the book. My primary goal is I hope it will speak to any of you struggling with a loss, be it a sudden one like we've experienced, natural calamity, or a chronic illness. As Mike's dad, as a seeker, I try to guide the reader up close with these families. You see and hear them. You'll hear some of their laughter, feel some of their tears. And my goal is that by sharing these stories, it will offer some handholds of inspiration. Not in a kind of a self-help way, but through the stories, through the back and forths. And then secondly, for my audience and hope, it's to reach those of us who are intrigued or moved by stories of compassion and resilience. Too often, we marvel at acts of bravery, and we don't need to go through the list of the events and the shootings or whatever too far. But one quick example. Last summer at the Country Music Festival in Las Vegas, with that massacre, there was a firefighter from Seattle there with some friends, and they were able to get away from the area. He looked at them and he was turning back, and he's turning back to go in toward the shooting area, and he said, "I've got to get to work, I've got a job to do." I think that's what he literally said, was quoted. And such acts of bravery are so vital. They remind us of the best of humanity, and there's no downplaying that. Yet my book, these stories, is really about something different. It's about the families of some of the victims, let's say. How are they doing now, 6 months or so later? Where will they be in 3, 10, 15 years? For example, will a mom who's lost her daughter at the festival, will she want to keep her daughter's door shut? It's just too painful to go in there and rearrange things, just compartmentalize it. That happens. Another family, the parents may jump in to face the forces, if you will, that caused their son's death, and take on trying to get at the root cause and be committed to that. Another family might run with the spirit, the legacy of their loved one, and just do some marvelous things, just in a sense, as bittersweet as it is, celebrating the essence of that person. These are some of the ranges of responses in the people that I get to know and hope to share. Some of them, and I'd be glad to tell you about any of the families later if you'd like, or not. Some end up doing some incredible things that have national implications. Yet, of course, most or many of us cannot or don't need to do that, and some of the responses are just so private and intimate. It may just be having a greater appreciation for what's right in front of you every day, right in your family, of course, or doing something in your town. So that range, that breadth of humanity, if you will, is in the book. Before I read a little bit, lastly, just wanted to offer one kind of takeaway to consider, and this is from our experience, Denise and my own. And again, while the book is not a self-help book in a prescriptive way. My feeling is, my belief is that readers will find things that will speak to you in different ways amongst some of these stories. And for us, one of the ways we were able to create bereavement supports to help other families, and that doing so really continues a legacy for our son, and we feel him in some ways right there. But how we were able to do this was by keeping our hearts open, and open to our pain, open to everything, open to an ongoing connection with our son too, in a new form, open to that possibility. And in turn, Michael affirms the work of the nonprofit in some spiritual way. He affirms it. That's helping a lot of people in a parallel way that people who come in to this work, families who come in and get supports there, often give back later on and keep affirming, if you will, to reach out to others, to help others. So I'm not sure I really said that well. It's not a resolution. It's not closure, as you probably know as well as or better than myself. You know, grief doesn't end, but it changes. And it's how we've gone forward. In our case, keeping a new connection, finding a new connection with our son, and taking on work that has a lot of meaning. That's how we've gone ahead. So why don't I stop there? I'm talking too much, but do you mind if I read? It's about a 9-10 minute excerpt, and I've got it edited a little bit. And what I'm going to share with you from the book is about another family, a Massachusetts family, who have struggled with, they lost their only son. They have adult daughters as well, but they're struggling with, will Christopher, their son, will he be remembered or will he be forgotten? Will that damning thing. It's the beginning of a chapter called Say His Name. Amidst what remains for Dolly and Jim Sullivan is a hero star stone cut from odd-shaped granite, standing like a sentry in their side yard. It is not too far from a large sugar maple that their son struggled to climb as a kid. Chris chafed while watching one of his older sisters scale it, trying again and again to do it himself. He finally made it when he was about 10. There are mementos the Sullivans hold on to, a blend of intense pride and equally sharp lament. A customized riding helmet has the blazing Big Red One insignia of the Army's 1st Infantry Division, in which Chris and his father and grandfather all served. One picture in their den shows Chris on leave with his parents, relaxed in a blue polo shirt, checking out the tall ships gathered in Boston Harbor. Within another frame is the program for a 2-day concert that a group in his hometown performed to raise money for a memorial scholarship. Both parents wear wristbands bearing Chris's name on their left arms. His mom, a retired postmaster, sometimes fingers dog tags bearing her son's image that hang from her neck as she talks. What they have are letters he wrote from Kosovo and Iraq, and his many uniforms: Eagle Scout, Civil Air Patrol, Cadet Leader, and a Scout Platoon Commander. and childhood stuff like a footlocker full of his toys. What they do not have, beside their only son, is access to his blonde-haired child, who turned 14 in 2017. The boy's mom, Christopher's widow, returned to her native Germany after Sullivan died and severed ties with his parents, denying them contact with a grandson. Beyond this, their worst fear is that people will forget Christopher James Sullivan. He was killed in Baghdad on January 18th, 2005, when an improvised explosive device went off near his parked vehicle. By then a captain in the 2nd Battalion, 12th Cavalry Regiment, 1st Cavalry Division, he had taken a call to check out a disturbance. His father says that as a company commander, he didn't really need to go investigate this himself, but that was not Chris's way. He lived largely for the men who served with him, once promising their wives and girlfriends at Fort Hood, Texas, that he would take care of them. It would have bothered him more to have one of his men under him get killed, his dad says. Long-legged, at 6 feet tall, Chris had warm blue eyes and his mother's broad smile. He was 29. A piece of the makeshift bomb entered his hip just below his flak jacket and came out through his neck. Before he died, Sullivan mouthed to his mates, "What happened? What happened?" His mother was at work when the news came, and his dad was homesick. As word spread across Princeton, a small town in central Massachusetts, Dolly and Jim felt an outpouring of support, with some gestures continuing well into the years ahead. It snowed heavily before Christopher's memorial service, and a neighbor saw to it that this didn't complicate things further. Jim, a Vietnam veteran who comes across as reserved and strained, and whose cloudy blue eyes sometimes appear fixed in the distance, recalls, "Bob Mason up in town plowed a lot. He went in with a front-end loader and took every bit of snow out of the cemetery. Things like that get to you." The town dedicated a memorial to Sullivan at a park on Veterans Day the next fall. It's above a soccer field behind the town highway barn, looking up to Mount Wachusett, a small peak with a ski area. Some surprise guests flew in from Fort Hood, including a major who had been close to Chris, and General Peter Chiarelli, who had led the 1st Cavalry in Iraq. After giving the town managers Chiarelli's email, the Sullivans had no clue that anyone was coming. That the general and Chris's colleagues made it meant so much to them, among the many things that they would never take for granted. Like jumper cables set in the back of Jim's Ford pickup, they stored those gestures away to retrieve in lean times, turning to them deep in the winter to restart or reach someone who was similarly stranded. Across from his monument, Chris's grandmother later donated a granite bench that has "Freedom is not free" engraved on its front face and the emblems of the 5 armed services on the back. That expression became their mantra, and sometimes a loaded trigger, especially for Dolly, who wished more young people would be taught to appreciate this logic. In the years ahead, administrators and teachers at the local school made sure their students learned about Chris and his sacrifice. When Sullivan was leading a tank platoon in Kosovo a few years earlier, he wrote to one of his sisters that his soldiers' duties included guarding children on their way to school each morning and helping villagers get firewood. He would approach local leaders asking what was needed that day, working out security so people could cut logs for their fuel. Known among his college friends for opening his wallet for homeless people, Chris was thrust into places where generosity and tolerance appeared to be irreconcilable with ethnic hatred and retaliation. His parents' ordeal multiplied during the next few years. Chris's widow, Sandra, took her toddler to Germany and cut off contact, not even allowing the Sullivans to send David a Christmas card or gifts. Chris barely had enough time to know his son. He was home only twice from the time David was born until he was killed. He did see David Williams stand up for the first time during an early holiday celebration at his parents' house. Jim and Dolly thought miscommunication and cultural differences had played a role in the rift. That split, however, did not indicate Chris's wife did not continue to hold him close. Signing in as Sandra Sullivan, she gave an online tribute 4 years later. "You are still the best man I ever met because you had an inner beauty and such a good heart, which I never found since I lost you," she wrote. The toll from this accumulated along with other family tensions, such as the parents' insistence that the proceeds from Chris's memorial concert, some $17,000, be used to establish a scholarship rather than go to his wife and son, as one of their daughters wanted. The Sullivans thought that their son's army pension and death benefits would see Sandra through, and they wanted to help graduates interested in mechanical engineering, which was Chris's major. Jim continued to work as a meter reader with a local utility. He had friends at the nearby Legion Hall and upkeep to do on their vinyl-sided home. Over long stretches, his wife felt unable to do anything, even as she made quilts with a group of friends, worked part-time, and got together with moms from other military families. The second time we met, several weeks before the 6th anniversary of her son's death, she said she had suffered a nervous breakdown. "It just got to me at some point," Dolly acknowledged. Adding to this was the fear that others would stop remembering, not unlike my own cringing thoughts about Mike. A few people moved away from them. While as inevitable as the pockmarked snowbanks on his street, this nagged at Jim too. Despite the other mementos they stored, a rubbing of his name from the Fort Hood Memorial, Chris's framed fraternity t-shirt, a patriotic quilt given to Dolly, and even the thought of flags being flown at half-mast in town for a week. Despite all these things, he wondered who would know. "I think that's the worst thing," he told me, "feeling that people forget about your son, that it didn't mean anything. It's just kind of unbelievable." So I'll stop there. Well, thank you for being here. I'd be glad to take any questions or any other things you'd like to know about some of the other families in general, or anything about the book, or Hope Floats. But and no urgency with that. It's a lot to.
How often are people coming to Hope Floats?
We are very busy. There are, Denise, 9 or 10 different groups right now?
There are 11 different groups.
I should know.
11 different support groups addressing different issues. Right, yeah, so child loss to suicide, loss, overdose, so separate groups for families. Yeah, so adults and children and their families too.
And we started, as I think I mentioned, our impulse over the early years was to help the parents, the adults, being, from our experience. And we've expanded the past couple of years for more programs for children, teens at 3 age, developmentally appropriate age groups meeting together along with their parents or caregivers. And those are like every other week on a Monday or Wednesday. So it's grown in that direction, which is needed. But
How are yours? You have other daughters?
yes, the daughter Amanda and son Chris, young adults. He's 30, she's 27. They've done well, but it hasn't been easy, honestly, for them not to go into it. They've found their own ways. Our son lives in Oregon, in a small part. He's just an independent spirit, and is making his own way through his own career, as he should. But there's a little piece that I think he needed to get away from some of the heaviness here around his brother's death, and us sort of plunging into our, our response to want to help other parents through that. And that's one of these costs, if you will, or impacts that does come up in some of the other families in my book, that if the parents are so committed to that or memorialize the loved one who's gone, what is the impact on the others, and obviously those dynamics within a family. But it's not to say Chris doesn't support what we do, and we're all on great terms. I don't mean to suggest
Come
that.
a long way.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
No, it's not.
Yeah. But I don't know if anyone has a different question or even to share anything, what brought you here tonight, or one of the newspaper articles on the book had the headline "Transformational Stories," and I don't think I used that word, but it's, to me, despite there is heaviness. The passage that I read is tough in a lot of ways, but most of these people come out of it. They transform their lives. I don't want to say the grief transforms them. I think that's too passive. It's kind of the work that one does, if you will.
Well, it's always the first issue. When you have a big loss, how do you go on?
Yeah,
It takes work.
yeah,
It's a process.
yeah. But, well, I appreciate you being here, and I do have books if anyone is interested, and or if you please take anything you'd like, bookmarks, the article. There's a longer piece there on the table, and great. Well, thank you. Yeah, welcome.